Let's get this show on the road.
Oh, hey, that's me.
Hello, everybody. My name is Trig Jegman. I have been a wiki founder, editor, developer, whatever you want to call it, for over 10 years now. And I like helping wikis. I think they're cool. I'm not really partial as to where that happens. As long as information gets documented somewhere, that's what I want to support. I also consider myself to be quite a dedicated person. If you've looked at my former endeavors, older videos, or the stuff I do for wikis, I put in a lot of time and effort to make sure that everything I do is the best it can be. Something I found interesting about one of the largest wiki hosts there is, Fandom, is that they claim to have over 250,000 communities. That's a lot. Surely not all of these are good, right? Spoiler alert, they're not. There's a ton of low quality stuff floating around, but that's not quite what we're going to be looking at today.
I swear to God, this is interesting, but you gotta hear me out, and also please read this.
Let's start at ground zero by looking at fandom's rules. There's a whole lot of them, and they're really hard to find where they're posted. That's a lot of reading, and I don't want to do it. Let's sum it up a little bit better. There's about 3 pages that matter a bit more than others. That's the community creation policy, the terms of use, and what fandom is not. These rules set out what websites can and cannot be made when hosting through fandom. Amongst other things, wikis cannot be about nor contain drugs and or alcohol, sexual content, particularly as a central concept. You can't have a topic besides spam, nonsense, vandalism. I call these scopeless wikis. They basically don't serve a function that matters. You're not allowed to only use it as a chat room or for the discussion boards through fandom. You cannot use them for images or file hosting. Wikis are not for in game trading, such as Pokemon. You can't represent a political party, advocate for or against political ideology, or just talk about politics in general. You can't have personal ideologies, particularly ones that are about discrimination or incite violence. You cannot create, discuss, or disseminate misinformation that threatens the health, safety, or well being of others. You cannot have wikis about sex fetishes or other pornographic subjects, even if you don't describe them explicitly. You can't have offensive names or titles for the URL. And you can't make communities about people who just generally don't matter. You also cannot have communities that are duplicate in scope or content to other wikis. You can't advertise for other websites, and you shouldn't just cover the same exact stuff that Wikipedia has. Don't be a link repository that just has a bunch of links to other websites. Quote, be a soapbox, battleground, or a vehicle for propaganda, advertising, and showcasing, unquote. Don't use slurs, those are bad. You can't have graphic descriptions of sexual acts or violence, and you cannot solicit personal information from users under the age of 18. I'll be listing specific examples in the bottom right corner. That sounds like a lot, and that's because it is a lot, but it does sum up pretty easily. Don't be a jerk. Keep things family friendly. Don't break the law and try and make wikis have like actual content on it and not just be garbage. It's pretty simple. Now, despite all of these rules being very plain to see, I have examples of every single one of them being broken, sometimes up to hundreds or thousands of times, and fandom appears to have taken no action against it. My original project to document these infractions and fandom's seeming lack of self governance was called the 95 Theses, kind of a spin off Martin Luther's. Basically, I was going to make a spreadsheet with some of the worst offending wikis I could find, and then just drop it off and leave. There were a couple of problems that prevented this from actually happening, though. The first of which was that it was just too difficult to maintain. Content would change, a couple of the wikis would close, Sometimes more graphic things would disappear, sometimes people would disappear, and all in all, it was just too challenging to try and present it consistently as a finished product. I was also concerned that if I just showed up and dropped this spreadsheet off, Phantom would close all the wikis and go, "What? No, we don't have a problem. Everything's fine. This guy's a liar." So ultimately, I decided I'm not going to do anything with it. I reported all the wikis to get them closed, and then I stepped away to do other things. Because of that, some of the wikis you're about to see have been closed, but it's important to realize that that's not because Fandom decided that they were going to close them, it's because I pushed them to do it. They would not have done so otherwise. I'm also going to be explicitly clear when a wiki has been closed because it's been archived through the Internet Archive. I'm going to leave the top banner on the tops of images to show that it was taken from an Internet Archive. As you can see, I've decided to start off strong. Is this particularly offensive? No. But I do think that it highlights a pretty good example that there's a lot of just immature and useless garbage floating around. Speaking of garbage, this is an example of those types of image only or file hosting type of wikis. It's the same picture multiple times with sometimes slightly different color palettes. You can see here on the preview section, it's just the same picture. And that's all that the pages are, is just the single image embedded on a page, and that's it. There are a ton of these. They are all over the place. Sometimes they're for memes, sometimes they're for fan art, just a lot of garbage. More examples would include just begging for Robux. Or, this one's interesting, making wikis that are intentionally awful. This is a weird trend and it's not as popular as it used to be, but most of these fall into one of two camps. The first one, like we're seeing here, is "This is the worst wiki in the world or the universe." And it's just a bunch of like low quality spelling, usually plagiarized articles from Wikipedia, and no one would reasonably want to use it because it just doesn't cover anything. The other type is some form of established franchise, but bad. So, the Halo but bad wiki, the Call of Duty but terrible wiki. I have no idea why these get made. They're not helpful to anyone, but they're still up. This isn't the only example of intentionally not useful wikis existing. This is the Some of the Lego Minifigures wiki. 6 of these websites exist, all made by the same guy. They each only cover between 5 to 10 different minifigs. This is completely useless. If somebody wants to learn about minifigures, they want to see all of them on one consistent resource, instead of whatever this guy feels like is the most important one of the day. Ultimately, it's just duplicating content that doesn't need to be duplicated. On a similar note, the Animal Crossing New Leaf Wiki is a wiki based off a single entry in the Animal Crossing franchise, but it really should just be a part of the main Animal Crossing wiki. By splitting this stuff across multiple sites, it means fewer people are going to be reading, fewer people are going to be editing. Usually, the design's less consistent, the information is less consistent, and you have to put in more work to make resources like templates. This hurts everyone, and despite reporting it, this wiki is still up. Another common occurrence is plagiarism. I've already talked at length about the Splatoon fandom wiki, but I made clear that they are not the only offender. Ideas wiki here on the right does it all the time. Don't think I don't know what you're doing. This example's a little weird, and it doesn't happen as often as it used to. Time sensitive content. These are wikis that are only made for a short period and don't really need to exist here in the year 2024. Sometimes, like the example on the left, it's for a class. That class ran in 2019 and clearly hasn't run again, so why is this site still up? It's not like people are going to need to reference it later on. On the right, we have the top 5 movies of 2015 Wikia. This is an incredibly small, limited scope, and it's often pretty subjective. Now, this is a site that could exist if it was top movies of the year and they had a 2015 page, but because they intentionally limited their scope so small to a specific time frame, this doesn't really help anybody out. Have you ever had to deal with somebody you don't really like? Why not make a wiki dedicated to why you hate them so much? And if that's not good enough for you, just call them some slurs. I'm sure it'll be fine. Let's get one thing straight. These are not wikis that are using these names just to be edgy. They're actively trying to offend people who are impacted by using said slurs. Some wiki names are just chosen for their shock value. Poop shitters and the scrotum queen are definitely cases of this. And a note about the latter is this wiki took multiple requests to close. Several different staff members looked at it and said, "This is appropriate. We want to keep this on our site." There is a lot of sexual content. It is everywhere. I had to censor one of the images that was found on a main page here, and I had difficulty finding an example of a main page that only had a handful of lewd images to begin with. A lot of the sites that tend to cover this stuff have dozens of pictures, and I kinda didn't feel like censoring all of them. As you can see, this is stuff that kids should definitely not be looking at, and I can't imagine advertisers would be too thrilled about either. Now, these examples are pretty upfront about what they contain, but that's not always the case for wikis. Even the pretty innocent looking ones can hold some stuff that is pretty unsavory. For example, this just seems like some random YouTuber's page or maybe a kid, but if you look at some of the pages on here, oh boy. Here's another example. Seems like a regular test wiki, but out of the 6 pages it contains, half of them are pretty inappropriate. These are only the examples I could find. I'm sure there's plenty more that I'm not able to locate quickly or effectively. Some people might make the argument, well, it's just kids being edgelords on the internet. Sure, but it also means fandom doesn't enforce the rules or policies that we discussed earlier, because if they did, these pages and or wikis outright wouldn't exist. I'm not trying to dictate or control what people are doing or creating. I'm only focused on, are they following their own rules set in place to keep communities safe? Here's a couple of miscellaneous wikis that didn't really fit anywhere else, but still kind of get my point across. You guys want to glorify some tragedy? How about Zionism or 9/11? There's a lot of 9/11. Like a lot of 9/11. Heck, there's a plane crash wiki if you just want to learn about plane crashes. Now, I think having all of these is weird. Some people might say, no, it makes sense to have a 9/11 wiki or a plane crash wiki because it serves educational value and people can learn from that. And while I agree that one wiki makes sense, I think it's really odd that there's multiple. If there was already an existing 9/11 wiki, and people wanted to contribute information about 9/11, why would they not just outright contribute to the site that already exists? Alternatively, why wouldn't Fandom, or when it was Wikia, try and condense them so there was only one site on the same subject? Many of these sites don't have high page counts. What I think happens instead is that it's more of like a clout thing. Instead of actually really wanting to document 9/11 specifically, they just kind of look at a tragedy and say, hey, there's a lot of information on this subject and I can make something out of it. I can create a wiki almost as like a completionable objective rather than something that they have a genuine interest in trying to make. I don't think it's super respectful to people who are impacted by this or any other tragedy, particularly in regards to the plane crash wikis, to continue to do this. If there's going to be a wiki dedicated to a subject like this, there should really only be one. Posing as law corporations or the government. I would not do that personally. I don't think that the Department of Veterans Affairs would be super thrilled to learn that someone was role playing like them on Fandom and giving out advice as though they were an official entity. I'd also like to bring attention to the police and law enforcement wiki. This one doesn't just document like police stations and where those are. It also talks about vehicle squadrons, the cars that make up the vehicle squadrons, individual cops, and where those individual cops live. Doxing people is bad, and I would really not encourage doing it, especially when it's legal agencies. Homophobia is also still bouncing around, usually within the site rules of various sites. The biggest offender of which is the Bible Wiki, which had a rule that said, and I quote, "We cannot endorse content produced by fandom/wikia.org supporting homosexuality, abortion, extramarital sex, pluralism, or anything that contradicts the Bible." This is a rule that was up for many, many years until I pushed fandom staff to remove it, as it was a violation of their terms of service. Terms of service, terms of schmervis, who cares? I think that it's not a good sign to allow people that are very clearly against inclusivity on your platform. Now, if you recall back to my 95 Theses project, most of those sites were just pretty randomly ordered wherever I felt like putting them. But, specifically Wikis 30 through 40, I chose to be about the same thing. Or more specifically, the same guy. Do you see where I might be going with this? Alright, let's cut to the chase. There is a lot of content about 1940s dictator. There are so many wikis or individual pages that have information about this guy. And it's not for educational purposes, it's usually glorifying the dude and what he did. Yikes. This isn't just a problem that impacts weird, small, niche wikis with 12 pages either. There are major sites where this is a problem, such as the Friday Night Funkin' Mods wiki. It has over 2,000 pages. Why was this specific one chosen to be, quote, a fan favorite? That means this showed up on the main page. That raises problems in one of two ways. Either you have a staff that is complicit with having these pages on there, and fandom doesn't want to intervene either, or it means you have a community full of people that really look forward and enjoy this sort of stuff, in which case you have a whole other problem on your hands. Mild side tangent. Good lord, what is going on inside the Friday Night Funkin' Mods wiki? You could pirate the entire Morbius movie. You could have sexual abuse within a family. You can glorify suicide, or at least try and get shock value out of a children's cartoon character. Nothing says family friendly fun like poop shitting and bestiality, right? And here's the thing, tons of big franchises are like this. Let's pick another random one, say, I don't know, Peppa Pig. And we'll take a look at Peppa Pig Fanon Wiki, and it's 16,000 pages. Spoiler alert, not every single page is the most appropriate. We have ones such as A Funny Kind of AIDS, Penis Cupcake, and NCP Seller. This is super concerning. When you open Fandom for the first time now, it will prompt asking if you're a kid or an adult. Kids are permitted on the platform, and I would assume that they are a pretty large user base for sites like this, or maybe sites like Friday Night Funkin'. This is super concerning because kids don't know what fanon is. They don't know that this stuff's made up. They just want to see stuff about their favorite TV show. And so when they find pages like Penis Cupcake, that's going to cause a lot of problems. Even in its best case scenario, if somebody does know what fanon is, this isn't the stuff that they want to see when they're making fan episodes or characters. They just want to make something they enjoy, not have to deal with offensive and quite grotesque content. Where was I? Alright, dictators. This site is quite obviously pro Stalin. It still is up, but the eyeball searing background has been removed. This is a conspiracy theory wiki, mostly revolving around Jeffrey Epstein and some former presidents and a bunch of other people. It's all complete Pizzagate level conspiracy nonsense. And this is sort of thing where it's like,
The deep state is coming to take away your children.
this should not be hosted anywhere, let alone on Fandom.
Oh boy!
Medical malpractice and misinformation is everywhere. For some reason. We have notes taken directly from college lectures, answers to medical exams, like formal medical exams that you have to pass in order to get your degree, and even just straight up leaked medical documents, like from the hospital. I don't know how I would react if I found out that my medical information was hosted on a wiki platform. This site here is called Immune Responses to Influenza. Those immune responses are the responses of the rats and pigs that they're injecting the disease in. This is one of the more concerning ones that I came across, the Hepatitis C wiki. Now, at first, it seems like a regular wiki full of information about what the disease is and what you can do about it. But on closer inspection, this is a wiki specifically dedicated to treating hepatitis C with alternative methods of treatment, not going to hospitals. And it outright says don't trust doctors, don't trust hospitals, use our methods instead. If people followed the advice that is on this wiki, they could die. It was up since 2012. Now, I've been looking at a variety of wikis for a really long time. I've seen hundreds of thousands of them. But after coming across this one, I had to stop what I was doing for a couple weeks. This is the Sudden Unexplained Death in Childhood Wiki. This one just makes me mad. How do you justify this? How do you look at parents and say, well, your kid passed away and somebody took their picture and age and location and put it onto a website memorializing dead children? What's its purpose? Is it to educate? I sure hope it's not to entertain. It's not communicating any major message. I blurred out a lot of information here out of concern for the family, but none of that stuff is censored on this website. This wiki is still up and still exists. It was only made within the last 2 years. Fandom does not monitor what is being made and is not taking appropriate action against wikis with the name alone that should raise red flags, let alone the content on them. And if they are monitoring things and shutting stuff down, they're not doing a good enough job because all of the sites I just shown up to this one in particular should never have been allowed to fly. Fandom's rules were put in place for a reason: to protect its users, to protect their brand identity, and to not be a drain on all their hosting materials itself. But because they aren't enforcing those rules, children can get exposed to offensive or sensitive materials far sooner than they ever should have. Bullying runs rampant from making wikis about people you don't like to homophobia and just calling people slurs in the title of your sites. Students are able to cheat exams or bypass assignments through school related wikis, or as we saw earlier, even bypass medical exams. Misinformation is already dangerous enough, but when it's political or medicinal, then there can be some serious problems, possibly even legal ones. Piracy is bad. I would not advise pirating things, such as distributing the entire Morbius movie for download. Original properties like Peppa Pig or Friday Night Funkin', and plenty of others, have their reputation tarnished or image harmed because of these deliberately offensive pages or just rotten communities as a whole. Ultimately, I think wikis as a whole, whether on fandom or not, lose a lot of respect, particularly from those who don't typically use wikis that often. But let's be clear, the real offense is that fandom profits financially off of work that violates their own terms of service and other policies, as well as just common decency. One of the most popular offenses is having a duplicate scope content coverage. That hurts independent sites such as Nukipedia because they have to compete not only with fandom's main Animal Crossing wiki, but also ones such as the Animal Crossing New Leaf wiki. That makes it harder for people who want either a different option or better information to be able to find what they're looking for. And let's be fair, this hurts fandom too, because now their own sites have to compete with each other, and they'll be negatively impacted if stuff overlaps too much. So having this stuff around hurts everyone. Now, I don't think fandom or the people that run it are some hyper capitalistic company that only runs on greed and profit. But even at its baseline level, it's just cheaper to not have garbage. Web hosting is expensive. If you got rid of the bad websites, you don't have to worry about bandwidth trafficking or file hosting, extraneous wiki resources, or having to compete with 500 different skibbity toilet wikis for search results. And look, I get it. 250,000 communities is a ton to go through, and a lot of them are over 10 or even 15 years old. They come from acquisitions like Wikia, Gamepedia, and a couple others. In many ways, those organizations were just as responsible for this mismanagement as fandom is. But for as many things as I showed you that came from 2009, many of them were made within the last 2 or 3 years. Fandom is also still deliberately letting this content slide. To be clear, Fandom is not the only one with this problem either. These four examples come from Mirahi specifically. This is something that impacts all wiki hosts, but Fandom has a proportionally much greater amount of it. Frankly, I'm not struggling to try and find these examples. There's plenty of different ways fandom makes their own lists for all the wikis they have, and just looking at the lists, you can pick out which ones probably don't need to stick around right away. They're not hard to find. I've also used some third party resources to better database query and find some specific terms that I know shouldn't be found either. Now, fandom hasn't been doing nothing about the problem, but that's because I've been working with their staff formally and also under the radar, depending on who it's with. I've pointed towards the terms of use and other rule violations to get such wikis closed. I've overseen the closure of over 2,000 wikis since November of 2023. Now, let's be clear, I ain't telling you how I did it. That still needs to stay a bit of a secret for right now. I also have a lot of work left to do. 3,790 wikis left to report at time of writing, and that number only gets bigger every day. Now, my experience with fandom staff has been quite positive, and I think that they too think that a lot of this stuff needs to be taken down. But there's only been a few people who have handled any of the requests that I've made, so I think that they just don't have the resource capacity in terms of people to actually take care and be proactive at shutting some of these sites down. While they have been helpful, I don't think that what they're doing is enough. Some of these wikis I've reported multiple times, and they're still up for reasons that I can't even begin to fathom why. A lot of people might say, these are weird or in communities that I don't care about. This will never impact me. I'm never going to see any of this stuff. You don't have a choice. The fan feed located at the bottom of all pages, it will take stuff from the wiki you're already on and what it thinks are related sites and related pages to what you're looking at. This is a Sonic Generations wiki, just a wiki about the game Sonic Generations. But if you look at the bottom, we have villains and some Sonic oddities. These are creepypasta characters that creep me out. I can't imagine what a kid who's just trying to learn about Sonic Adventures is going through, taking a look at the boiled one. It's also to my understanding that there's no protection against seeing certain pages from other wikis. You could have sexual content, violence and gore, medical misinformation. All of this stuff can still be served to you on sites you don't even want to look at. What I think fandom should do, they need to shift their focus from quantity and go to quality. Do people actually go to fandom because they want to go to fandom? Or is it just because it's the top result and that's the first thing that they click on? I think you would bolster your site retention numbers far more if you made fandom a place that folks actually wanted to go to. I think they need to make a team, and their entire purpose is to just go through everything that you have and get rid of stuff that you don't need, especially from things prior to 2016 and definitely 2009. You gotta close inactive sites. You already have a banner saying that inactive sites are going to be closed. Actually, close them. You need to crack down on duplicate scopes and content. There's over 700 Pokemon wikis that I have in a big separate list. We don't need all 700 of them. I also think that making a wiki needs to be just a little bit harder. I know it's a big advertising thing to just say, make a website at the click of a button, but if there's no protections to prevent garbage from being made, or worse, duplicate content, what's the point? Even having a pop up on creation if you type in, let's say, Mario or Kirby or Shure microphones, having it search a database of common franchises and then saying, are you sure you don't want to contribute to this instead? That could solve a lot of the problems being faced. Some people might be asking, why bother even covering the stuff in chapter 1 at all? All the stuff that came after it was far more offensive, far more impactful. And that is true. A lot of those pages that came later in the presentation are significantly worse. But as bad as those are, the regular type of garbage that was in chapter 1 and a lot of those sort of expulsion of gas wikis or some of the Lego minifigure type wikis are far more common. Both of them are problematic. If you reached into a barrel of apples, it's unlikely that any of them is going to have a worm. But you're probably not going to reach into that barrel if a quarter of the apples are just outright rotten to begin with. Removing poor content from your platforms makes it better. Now, I've been on the internet for a while. I know how some people operate.
Oh, I want to help out.
Well, there's not a lot that can be done. Fandom doesn't really provide a good way to try and request these sorts of things to go away. And even if they did, I don't think they have the staff capacity to really handle any of that. That said, if you find something particularly egregious, send it to me. I'll take a look at it and I'll see what I can do. One way you can help out is by sharing this video to other people. I know it sounds obnoxiously cartoonish, and I'm sorry, but I do believe it. particularly for those who don't tend to use wikis very often or don't know much about fandom as a whole. I think it's very important for them to understand what this platform has and what they seem to not be taking proactive action against. Instead, Fandom has always been a reactive company. They react to problems should they arise. If enough people make a stink about all the stuff that we've shown off today, they might actually take action to get it removed. Another thing, no, I don't work for Fandom. Please stop asking me if I work for Fandom. I'm not affiliated with them. I'm just kind of a weird third party type of deal. I feel like I have to do something because I find all this stuff around, and when you have people's medical documents being leaked or hundreds of thousands of pages being plagiarized, I feel like somebody has to do something about it, right? But I shouldn't have to be the one to do this. This is fandom's responsibility to take care of, not mine or some random other editor. Do I hate fandom? No. I know this might shock some people, but I do think fandom and its services are super important. I still think wikis are important and they should be good regardless of who's hosting them. But despite that, I can't support a platform that continuously hosts dangerous and garbage content and has so many advertisements surrounding it. All of this is to say, do better. This is a topic that means a lot to me. This very video is the culmination of over a year's worth of work and experience and wanting to find a solution to this problem. Chances are, if you're hearing this and you made it to the end, you probably care about this too. If that's the case, I beg of you, please share this video with people, especially those who might not otherwise know what might be going on with this website or any other websites for that matter. I want all wikis to succeed, and I want them to do so safely and strongly. Thank you very, very much for watching. Story time. How to be cool for idiots. Brought to you by How to Be Cool Wiki. Tired of being called idiot? Here are some tips to be cooler. What did you expect it how to be cool? Video file placeholder. What to do? This is the hardest bit. Study. The only way you're going to improve how smart you are is to study harder than everyone else, so you're gaining knowledge and keeping with the class at the same time. Playing puzzle games is not effective and is a waste of time, unless you play for fun. Also, don't end turn around when someone calls, "Hey, stupid." Just because you're disadvantaged doesn't mean everyone is. Note, this is real life example. A boy at my school is an idiot. I won't say who he is for privacy. He says all sorts of stuff about himself that we don't need to know, and when we tell him that we are trying to do work, he doesn't get it. Don't do the same. That's why we ask questions instead of you telling us useless thing in your world. Never ever take anger out on others. It is never okay to do.